So I have George Gammon, and I need to apologize. Not that I have George Gammon. I've been excited. I mean, this guy, him and I agree on so many different levels, but my apology is, actually, my wife just corrected me that it is, what, babe?
He and I, not him and I.
It is he and I, not him and I. My speed is pretty decent, right? If you would not say. I mean, I have webcams up the wazoo. I have so many cams. I have so many speed, but it was buffering. We were dropping frames. Audio is going to be great, though. Not just the audio is going to be great. What George has to say, it's not what he would normally say. Let me just preface it. I was like, what? Wait. And they're gonna implant what under your skin? And I think it's because you could say things on other people's platforms and get them demonetized and banned, which you can't say it on yours because YouTube's like, you can't say that. So he says it here on this channel. Please stick to the very end. But we're talking about how crazy the system is, like behind the scenes, what is going on. The banking system, the dollar, the everything that is churning behind, where we just sit down and you're like, do you really think that? You think Biden can pull his face off? It's a gigantic computer. I think so. I've seen it a few times. So you want to make sure that you start from the beginning, make it to the end. If you get, to the drop frames, you're like, I'll just put headphones on. I need to listen. You need to listen. And also I am giving a George Gammon special on the stock market course. Link for my apologies. So that is down there. And he even's like, oh yeah, the 200-day moving average. I was just talking to Peter Schiff about that. Or I'm like, I know, that's what I trade off of. Which, like, on gold, look, we made it. We're above. Yay. So gold is good. Bitcoin on the 200-day, but do not count the Bitcoin out, my friends. I know. Let me move that. See right there. You line that up. Oh, probably fell under the 50 there. All those kind of, oh, wait, do I want to make a trade? One moment. Let me make a trade. But link in the description for that. But for the discount, the George Gammon discount. Oh, I can't believe you're doing it at this price. But let's get on to George. All right, you guys. So I'm super pumped, excited. I have George Gammon. Today we are talking about two things. We're talking about the dollar. We're also talking about the global elites. And also it's kind of nice because he can come on my channel and we can talk tinfoil hat stuff. I get deplatformed. He does not. But George, go ahead. Let's start you out. Go ahead. Hit it. I heard you giggling in the back.
Oh, no, I just sincerely appreciate you having me on the show. It's great. I'm a big fan of yours. I love the type of content you produce, and I can't wait to dive in and hopefully deliver some good value to your viewers and listeners.
All right. So George told one lie. Can you pick which one it was that he follows me? Was it that he follows me or that I actually have good content? Nope, neither. Okay. So let's talk about the global elites. What is going on? And there's so many things that my friends in the YouTube sphere say, and then they get deplatformed. So we're gonna be careful and how we're going to approach this on my channel. But give people like the back end, what is going on with this great reset and all this craziness that people didn't believe, but now are like, hey, this stuff is real.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I started talking about central bank digital currencies and the Fed coin back in 2019. And when I first started my channel, it was the same thing back then. Everyone was calling me a tinfoil hatter and a conspiracy theorist and all these things. And now you talk about the Fed coin or a central bank digital currency and like, oh yeah, that's happening. Yeah, I just heard about it on CNBC or Bloomberg. It's like, okay, well, at what point does a conspiracy theory become a conspiracy fact? But what's happening with the global elite, it's really, a lot of people just kind of throw out that abstract term, but really we're talking about a group of politicians, the Davos types. So you've got some hedge fund guys, groups of politicians, corporate CEOs, the World Economic Forum, the IMF. These are the individuals that I'm specifically referring to. I think most people are when they kind of use that blanket term, the global elite. And if you look at their policies and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, because they never come out and just specifically say exactly what they want to do, which is, I think, why so many people really don't trust them. They kind of beat around the bush and they kind of imply this and they imply that. But again, when you go to their website and read what they actually say, and then you kind of connect the dots, it's pretty clear that regardless of whether their intentions are good or they have malicious intentions, I mean, that's debatable. The one thing they want is more central planning. They want more power. In their mind, they are the chosen few. They're the ones that have the intellectual capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong. And they know, they have been given, they've gone to the top of Mount Sinai, and they're the ones that have been ordained to come down with the tablets of stone. And, they're the ones that need to tell us rubes and yokels and average Joes and Janes exactly how we need to live our life and what we need to do, because we're just too stupid to get it. And you have to look at it from that standpoint first and foremost. And once you understand that's their worldview, then everything really starts to make sense. So let's assume for a moment that they have good intentions, that they truly want the best for society, and they truly want to increase the standard of living around the world, but they just think that people left to their own devices will never, ever do that. And the free market and capitalism can never get that done. The only way to get that done is if the decision-making is consolidated to this group of global elite, or the people that have been, preordained or have had the epiphany and have been truly, their mind has been expanded to where they can understand all the things us simpletons really can't grasp. And therefore, if we give them control, they're going to steer us and the economy in the right direction. And as a result, we will move into this kind of state of utopia, or we will progress and the standard of living in aggregate total will become better. Now, that's one opinion of them. If you have a more malicious opinion, you could say that, listen, this is just a power grab, and these people are sociopaths, and they understand that by taking these measures or by promoting these policies, that it's going to lead to more central planning, more power, and more centralized control. And they just happen to be the people that would benefit financially and from a standpoint of pull, graft, power. They just happen to be in those positions. So what we have to do is we have to go back in history, back in time. Once we have that framework laid out, then we have to say, okay, the central planning, at its apex is really about Marxism. So what did Marx believe? Well, he didn't really see capitalism as the enemy. He just saw it as a necessary means to an end, that you couldn't go from feudalism to socialism or communism without going through a long period of capitalism first, because he did admit that the capitalists were actually very good. They were very industrious and very efficient, and they could build all of these things. But at a certain point, the capitalists, we would reach something called late stage capitalism, where the capitalists themselves would feed on one another. They would feed on their employees because they're trying to squeeze more profits. And therefore, the entire system would collapse in on itself. So it's up to the socialists, once they recognize that we're at that late stage capitalism, to come in and take the means of production away from the capitalists in order to number one, prevent the capitalists from destroying the whole system they built. And number two, to take that and improve upon the means of production in order to expand society and improve the standard of living and take us into that socialist utopia. Okay. So you've got to understand that going back to these global elite, I truly believe that's their worldview. And so most people would say, oh, that's nonsense, George, because they can see that communism or socialism didn't work in China. It didn't work anywhere that it's been tried. That's true, but you have to ask the question, why didn't it work? And if you're someone that believes that that's the way the world should be, if not for a couple little speed bumps that they just didn't have the technology to fix back in the day, but maybe now we do, it allows you to connect those dots a lot easier. So let's go back to communist Russia and ask ourselves the question that, why did it fail? Well, one of the big reasons it failed is because they didn't have any price discovery. There were no prices, or there are no market prices. So if you don't have the information, the price signals telling the entrepreneur or the business owner how to allocate resources, scarce resources, by the way, that have alternative uses, they're going to waste those resources. Okay, so that's how you can have a country like a system like they had in communist Russia with the Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe, but yet they can have famine because, again, there are no prices telling them how to allocate those scarce resources. And over time, you may be able to sustain it over a decade or two or three or four, but sooner or later, it's not going to work. You're going to run out of those resources and the system is going to collapse in on itself. So if you're one of these World Economic or Davos types, right, the global elite, that truly believe that socialism is the true path to prosperity, you believe in what Marx said, you just go back to Russia and say, okay, well, that would have worked, but they tried socialism too early. They didn't allow capitalism to take root. Number two, they didn't have any price signals. So we've got to figure out how to solve that problem. So I think that, and this is total speculation, I don't have anything to prove this part of it. But again, if you look at their website, if you look at all these blog posts, like, the one they did on 2030, how you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's the one that everyone talks about. But there's a lot more to it than just that. But if you take all of that information, and you have to ask yourself, okay, if you were put into this position, if you just didn't have any principles, if you had no morals, if you had no ethics, and you somehow believed what they believe, you drank the global elite Kool-Aid, let's say, how would you take us to that world of socialism where it just advances society forward? We don't have to deal with all the problems of free market capitalism and greed anymore. Well, what you'd need to do first, again, you'd have to solve that problem of price discovery. So how do you fix that? Well, what I would suggest would be a central bank digital currency. See, because what happens with a central bank digital currency is all of us would have an account, a bank account with the Fed. So just like you or maybe some of your viewers might have an account with Wells Fargo, with Bank of America, with Chase, you've got a checking account. Now you would have a checking account with the Federal Reserve. Just like the primary dealer banks or a lot of the commercial banks have an account set up with the Fed. So why does that matter? Well, first and foremost, they would move into a position where they could start issuing loans into the real economy, right? So right now they can't do that. They can create all the bank reserves they want through quantitative easing. They can take their balance sheet to $1 trillion, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle as far as the creation of dollars in the real economy, because they're still held hostage to a certain degree by the commercial banks, because the commercial banks have to take that additional balance sheet capacity and create the dollar-denominated loans in the real economy to get the inflation that the government needs to bail them out, because they have all this debt on balance sheet, off balance sheet. So, but the Fed, my point is the Fed really isn't in control of that new dollar creation in terms of broad money. right? Maybe base money, they can control that. So if the Fed is able to take control over the bank accounts and then lend directly into the real economy, now they can control base money, but they can also control broad money. They can get around the commercial banking system. So then they truly do have control over the creation of the dollar or more dollars, where in the past, in a normal system, it's really the commercial banks that control the amount of dollars by additional lending and then those loans being paid off. And now what we have is this kind of hybrid system where the government is spending all of this money into the real economy through deficit spending that's being monetized by the Fed. So that's creating additional dollars. But I think the central bankers look at that and say, okay, well, scenario A, we're dependent upon the commercial banking system. That's suboptimal. And scenario 2, now we're dependent upon politicians. That's definitely suboptimal. So, how do we take back control? Okay, so we understand how they could control the lending component in the creation of dollars. But if we all have accounts with the Fed, they're seeing all of the transactions in real time. So think about how many transactions occur with the 300 million people. So, plus or minus, however many, in the United States, you're talking about potentially billions of transactions daily. So now all those billions of transactions would go through the Fed. Let's say their cloud that they have, they would get those transactions in real time. Okay. Now, if you read the World Economic Forum's website, another thing they want to do for health reasons is they envision a world where everyone would have like a computer chip under their skin. And you say, George, that's nonsense. You're just being a tinfoil hatter. Listen, don't take my word on it. Go read it. It's right on their website. I'm not making this up. So, and the reason they're pitching this is because, for the healthcare system, it would be fantastic. It would be like this minority report where all of your vital statistics would go into the same cloud, and they could crunch these numbers and maybe prevent some people from getting sick or whatever. And that would lower the cost of healthcare. And then we would be able to have socialized healthcare that was just as good as what the free market would produce, right? Again, this is them talking, not George Gammon. So you have all of this data going into the cloud in real time. Okay, well, if we could combine that amount of data with artificial intelligence, which is what the World Economic Forum talks about constantly, then you could envision a system that could potentially allocate resources just as efficiently, and again, this is their view, not mine, just as efficiently, potentially, as the free market could, but without the need of free market prices. You see, then you solve that problem that brought down communist Russia. And one of the main problems that socialism, defined by the government owning the means of production, one of the biggest problems they've faced in the past, and what's prevented them from really taking control of the entire global economy. So I think that this is kind of the direction they're going. And I want to be very clear. Their objective to have a centrally planned system is not up for debate. They're very explicit. As far as them getting from A to B with what I'm talking about through a central bank digital currency, they're very keen on a central bank digital currency, and they would like the global reserve asset to be a digital SDR. And I can go into what that is in a moment. That's really controlled by the IMF. But as far as what I'm talking about, their vision in how to get to a socialist utopian society through a central bank digital currency, that's me speculating based on the research I've done in the past.
Yeah, the special drawing rights. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the SDR is basically the fiat currency of the IMF, which actually is an idea that Keynes came up with back in 1944 during Bretton Woods, because Keynes wasn't he saw the dollar, the system they were thinking about, and that's that the United States had all the gold, basically. So they're just going to peg the dollar to gold, and then the other currencies could peg to the dollar, and they'd have kind of a de facto gold standard, while at the same time the U.S. controls the majority of the gold. And Keynes is like, yeah, okay, that might work, but and then Triffin came along, with Triffin's dilemma and Triffin's paradox, and said, wait a minute, time out, guys. You may think that's a good idea, but eventually that peg is going to break. That's unsustainable, because the government or the United States would have to run such huge trade deficits that you would either hollow out the manufacturing base, which is exactly what happened, or the world wouldn't be able to get the dollars they need to grow at full capacity. And that's where we get the Eurodollar system and all these other things that sprouted up as a result. But my point is, Keynes came up with an idea called bank core. And that was kind of a global money, and it wouldn't be controlled by any one nation. He wanted to set up a kind of a main bank, and that's when we got the IMF, and that's when we got the World Bank as a result of kind of what was discussed in Bretton Woods. So if you kind of read what an SDR is, it's basically bank core. It's basically Keynes's idea. And so now a lot of these central banks around the world, they hold SDRs as reserve assets, just like they would hold gold or US treasuries. And they can trade them back and forth between central banks, but they really can't be used outside of that. So what they've said is they would, instead of having the dollar as the reserve currency and the reserve asset of choice, they would prefer, they want to move into a system where it's actually the digital SDR, and then each one of the central banks have their own digital currency. But of course, all that data goes to the IMF in real time. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if they are producing the global digital reserve asset through fiat, it's not backed by anything other than other fiat currencies, other central bank digital currencies, then who controls that? And then you're like, okay, you put this dot and that dot, connect that dot, and it all goes back to, oh, I see. The World Economic Forum controls it, and the people at the IMF, and therefore the hedge fund managers and the banksters and these corporate CEOs who have what I call, they've drank the Klaus Kool-Aid, because the guy that's in charge of the World Economic Forum is a guy named Klaus Schwab that looks eerily like a James Bond villain, like Dr. Evil or something like that. That's why I always say that the World Economic Forum is controlled by Klaus and Mr. Bigglesworth. If you remember, and if you think I'm being funny, I'm actually not. If you look at pictures of them, you'll see exactly what I'm referring to. But that's how the SDR kind of plays into all of this.
So funny. And there's everything that you're saying. I'm just like, yep, and yep. This is exactly what I say to my audience. Can you just why don't we wrap this up with the dollar and what can we do to protect ourselves in the end? Like, how close are we coming?
Well, if you look at what the net result has been with central planning in the past, it's, history is a great teacher. And what we see is usually it produces fewer goods and services, because it's just not going to be as efficient as free market capitalism, no matter how bad they want it to be. So if it produces fewer goods and services, while at the same time, they're going to have to compensate with universal basic income, they're going to have all these initiatives, especially if the Fed or the central banks now have the power to lend directly into the real economy. That means a lot more currency units chasing a fewer amount of goods and services. Why is that? Because the Fed or the central bank wouldn't be constrained in their lending practices by a P&L or by having to have positive equity. You see, the Fed, why can't they have negative equity? We don't know. Would that even matter if you've got an entity that can create their own bank reserve just out of thin air? So you see what I'm saying? We're a normal bank. They have to really be concerned with someone's ability to pay back that loan, where the the Fed, they wouldn't care about that. They could lend not based on your credit score. They could lend based on your social score, as an example. They could lend based on whatever group had favor with the current political system. So my point is they could create a lot more dollars by lending than the commercial banks could create right now, because they don't have the same constraints. The net result is more currency units chasing fewer goods and services, because if you have a system where the means of production are controlled more and more by the central planners, it's going to be less efficient. There's going to be supply chains breakdown. And just what we've seen in 2020 and 2021, where, everyone, I think, watching this video right now has had experiences in their own life where they have access to fewer goods and services than we had just back in 2019. Well, if you want to see that on steroids, just give the means of production over to central planners, and you're going to see a drastic reduction. So what does that mean? That means the price of goods and services most likely going up. So consumer price inflation. Now, that doesn't mean that asset prices go up at the same time. We've seen throughout the US history, in fact, in the 1970s, we've seen periods where we've had significant consumer price inflation, while at the same time, the stock market has gone down by 50%. The time frame I'm referring to specifically is 72 to 74, where the stock market went down in nominal terms by 50%, but yet we had significant consumer price inflation. So just because we have the consumer price inflation doesn't necessarily mean that housing prices are still going up or stocks are still going up. They can happen separately. So you've got to compartmentalize the two. But if you're someone that believes that this is going to come to fruition in the future, you've got to believe that we're going to have consumer price inflation. Therefore, you want to own precious metals. And I'm not saying you take 100% or anything like that, but 10% of your portfolio in gold just to have that hedge. If you're someone that likes Bitcoin, I don't consider it insurance. I consider it a completely separate part of the portfolio in kind of a speculative class. But then you might want to have some Bitcoin. Again, you're not going in 100%. You're doing this prudently, and you're setting up a portfolio that plays well, with the other assets that you have. And then I like things that pay you to own them. I think the commodity producers right now that pay a dividend, they'll have a lot of pricing power if we see lumber continue to go up, or the price of copper or oil or coal, uranium, etc. But then one thing that pretty much most of the people watching this video right now can do is just make sure that if they have a home loan, whether it's on a rental property or or where they live, just make sure that it's a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Because then what's going to happen is you're going to increase your purchasing power by the government trying to increase the rate of inflation. And just, a simple numbers would be, if you can lock in a 3% mortgage over 30 years, if we get 10% inflation per year, that's going to be a transfer of purchasing power from the bank to you at that delta, because you're paying it back with cheaper devalued dollars. And I think that's kind of the easiest thing that most people can do.
Not adjustable. Yeah, because if we're at 10% inflation and you have a 3% loan, that's 7% on your side. It's a win-win-win. I agree with you on Bitcoin, speculative. When it comes to people that are on my channel, I swing trade. So I'm a momentum swing trader. So okay. I get things, they get beat down and then they reverse. You get in, they start to die off, you get out. So it's just this constant momentum of buying and selling.
Yeah, commodity trend right now, I think, is an interesting play. I just spoke with Chris Cole the other day, who's the guy that set up the Dragon portfolio. And, for people who know the Dragon portfolio, commodity trend is a big component of that. And I think that, now with commodity prices having gone up substantially, if you believe we're going to have a long-term super cycle in the commodity space, like we've seen in the past, and you're like, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of overbought right now, I hate to get in at this point. If you could use that strategy, that commodity trend following type of strategy. I'm sure you do that quite extensively. That may be a prudent way to go right now.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen really quick just to talking commodities, gold, silver.
Yeah, I've thought actually, even for my own portfolio, I've thought about selling puts as a way to build a bigger position in some of the commodities that may be oversold right now, but over the long term, I'm very bullish on. Just a cash flow. So if you'll take it at that price all day long over the long term, but until you get to that price, you're happy just to be paid, to provide that insurance type thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Something that happened on gold. I was actually waiting for this. This was a trend. I don't know if you could see my chart. We were, yeah. We were just in this channel. Everything always goes in channels. And then we popped above the 200-day moving average. So first we got out of the channel, and I'm like, "Yep, we're gonna buy." I'll circle it so you can see it.
It's funny you say that. I remember my good buddy Eric Townsend and Patrick Ceresna were talking about this exact same thing with gold popping over the 200-day moving average. I heard him talk about it the other day on Macro Voices.
Oh, it's huge. It's like there are certain indicators that we look for. The 50 gets above the 50, shoots up. We broke a channel, it shoots up. We get above the 200-day moving average. I always trade things that go up. I trade winners, not losers. And you're red pill, so we could probably talk about that all day long. But looking at this, it was the trend. And gold's actually and I was telling people to get out back here. We also had a double bottom right here, 1, 2, and then the bounce. And it was like, yep, buy. So we actually do have a strong gold. Bitcoin, I was actually telling people to get out about a month ago, but I love it. I mean, I love gold. I love silver. I love Bitcoin. I just think there are times to get in. There are times you just take your profits and you buy what you want to buy and enjoy your life. George, if you want to just go ahead and tie it up, tell people where to go or what to do or anything, I just want to say thank you for coming on the channel first and foremost.
No, well, thanks for having me on. People can find me just by Googling my name or going to YouTube and putting my name in there. I'm all over the place. I'm probably overexposed. It's just George, typical spelling, and last name is Gammon, Gammon.
Sounds like a plan. And was that box behind you 10 minutes ago, or is that just my brain? Because I swear I looked and I never saw a box. And then all of a sudden there's a box.
No, I think I was right here like this. And then I went like that.
The magical box.
Yeah. It just appeared.
That's funny. You're like the Fed. And I've created money out of nothing. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. And I'm sure we'll talk soon, or we'll talk later.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me.